In this lesson, we'll take a look at driving some of our different channels and our materials using a ramp. So let's jump back in here. And so we're going to use this tube up here as our example. So let's create a material for it. And this time, let's create a Phong. So we're going to go to Materials, Phong, and let's double click on the Phong itself. And we'll call this something like Tube Phong. And let's change this to sort of a darker color, almost black. We'll assign it to that tube. We can go in and now modify the specularity if we'd like to. So maybe broaden that up and then taking the color down a little bit. So let's say that we now want to kind of vary the color across this surface. There are different ways that we can do this. And one of the things that we need to think about when we're going to be doing that is the UV situation on that particular piece of geometry. Now, we're going to talk about UVs more later and in more detail. But just to kind of sum up, UVs are basically how we tell the software how we want a 2D texture to wrap around a 3D piece of geometry. So the textures that we create, and even a lot of the procedural textures, are going to be, 2D images, flat images that are going to be applied. Now we're applying them to something that is in 3 dimensions. For instance, something like these tubes. We need to know how we're going to apply that onto these tubes. Now we're going to be using this particular tube. It's a NURBS piece of geometry because those UVs are intrinsic in a NURBS piece of geometry. Any piece of NURBS geometry is really just a flat plane that has been wrapped around and sort of stitched together in certain ways. So think about this tube as kind of a piece of paper that's been rolled into a tube, and then that tube has been sort of deformed into this pipe shape. Okay, so it already has a sort of set UVs that we can take advantage of. So we're not really going to be thinking about or talking too much about the UVs, but I just want you to be aware whenever we start to add maps like this, these are things that we need to think about because it's going to affect how that gets applied to our geometry. We'll talk about UVs here more in a few lessons. So with that, we've got our tube applied, and let's say we want to have kind of a glow on this. So maybe this hot fuel is coming in from this tube down to the thruster, and so we want to have this sort of glow in here, but we don't want it across the entire tube. Well, we can start to use the incandescence channel. So if we just click on the color and start to add something like red, you can see where we get that sort of glowing look. And if you make it a little bit darker, you can see it gets a little bit less intense. But the problem is it's happening across the entire surface. And so anytime that we want to use a separate node to drive one of these channels, we can hit this little checkerboard here. So to the right of incandescence, we'll click on this. So bring up our Create Render Node window, and we can decide what kind of render node we want to be able to use to drive our incandescence. Let's go to 2D Textures, and let's choose a ramp. All right, now whenever we choose a map or something to drive one of our textures, we want to go over to Shading in our viewport and turn on Hardware Texturing. That's going to allow us to see the effect of any maps that we have assigned in our viewport. So right now you can see we've got this V ramp. It's going from black to white, so just a simple gradient. But you can see the effect here. On this side of the tube, there's no incandescence. And on this side, it's glowing white. So you can get a very good indication of how that's being applied from here to here. Now, if we were to change this to a U ramp instead of a V ramp, it's going to go around the other direction. So, if yours looks like this, all you have to do is switch the ramp type. Now in past versions, it's used sort of a rainbow as default. If you want to get back to that, you can go to Presets, Rainbow, you can replace, and that just gives you kind of a good indication too, that, that this is the red end, this is the blue end, the green in the middle. Okay, so let's say that we do want this end to be sort of red. So let's select the color. You can do that by selecting the dot, and then you can come down and change the actual color. So let's just darken that up a little. I'm just going to drag the slider down. Now we don't want it to be green in the middle. We just basically want no incandescence. And so To do that, we can set this to black. So I'll just dial this down to black. On this side, we want it to be this sort of red color again. So we can come in here, and if we wanted to sample this, we could use the eyedropper and sample that back down. Now let's change the interpolation. So let's change this from linear to smooth. And so you can see now how it goes from red to black to red again. Now, if I want to kind of constrain the red over more to one side and the other, we need more points in the middle. So I'm going to click here to add one more black point, and then we're going to drag these. And you can see as I drag these colors, this gradient gets tighter in here. So as I move this over, you can see the effect in our viewport, where you could just have it right on the ends, or you could have it extend out a little bit more. And we can do the same thing over here on this one. Kind of pull this out. Okay. If you wanted another color in here, you would just add another color, and you could come in and add whatever color it is that you want. If you want to get rid of any of these colors, you can just hit the little X. Okay, let's kind of make this a little bit more gradual. And then also, you know, if you don't want this to be completely black, we could add back in a little bit of red to it. Maybe do the same thing here. Add back a little bit of that red. So it's not completely black, but that allows us to kind of modulate our color, in this case, the color that's driving our incandescence across the surface. And you can go back at any time and modify that ramp as much as you want. Let's go ahead and apply that material to our other tube. So there we get our same material applied there. All right, so in the next lesson, let's take a look at adding different materials to one object. So we don't have to just add a material to a single object, one material per object. We can actually add multiple materials if we want to. Well, let's take a look at that next.